Goes to war. Let's play hardball. Good evening. I'm Chris Matthews in Philadelphia. Let me start tonight with this. So look who's riding shotgun in the clown car. It's a Dick Cheney who refuses, despite screeching popular demand, to just leave Washington. Well, this strange Dr. Strangelove is now out there this weekend pushing what he calls military action to get the Russians out of Crimea. This is the same Dick Cheney whose last push for military action, the lame brain's decision to invade, conquer, and occupy Iraq, cost at least 186,000 lives. Is he, Dick Cheney, the Meistersanger of the clown car? Is he? Or is it the charismatically clueless Sarah Palin, who called this weekend for a nuclear confrontation with Moscow?
Mr. President, the only thing that stops a bad guy with a nuke is a good guy with a nuke.
Wow, well, it's hard to get to the right of that thought. Yes, this is the talk of the American right as of this weekend, from seasoned war hawk to Alaskan half-governor. And this is as scary as it is, makes for great applause lines in the crazy camp. When Governor Palin talked of forcing a nuclear standoff there, the peanut gallery of the hard right went wild with giggling applause. To this crowd of geeks meeting in Washington this weekend, contemplating nuclear war is the closest it gets to a social life. Thank God there are sane people in the Republican world who can't stand this babbling, frothing insanity. People like former Secretary of State James Baker and former Pentagon Chief Robert Gates, even Henry Kissinger, who says calling Vladimir Putin names doesn't constitute a foreign policy. But calling Barack Obama names is just about all you heard through this wide-open windows of the clown car this weekend. Tonight we get to enjoy the God's good news that these chicken hawks of the right, who have never been in anything so wild as a schoolyard fight, can speak as generals, but don't, again, thank God, get to actually call the shots. Howard Fineman is editorial director for the Huffington Post Media Group, and David Korn is Washington bureau chief for Mother Jones. Both are MSNBC political analysts. Over the weekend, as I said, former Vice President Dick Cheney gave us his Dr. Strangelove views toward Russia and attacked President Obama. Let's watch.
I worry when we begin to address a crisis by the first thing we do is take options off the table. I don't think the administration should do that.
Have they done that?
In a sense, saying that no military. He seems to operate that way most of the time. There are military options that don't involve putting troops on the ground in Crimea. We could go back and reinstate the ballistic missile defense program. It was taken out. It was originally going to go in Poland, Czech Republic. Obama took it out to appease Putin. We could do training exercises in Poland, joint exercises. We can offer military assistance in terms of equipment, training, and so forth to the Ukrainians themselves.
When you listen to Dick Cheney talking about keeping military options on the table, it has to be emphasized this is the guy responsible for the Iraq war largely, something that caused the death of at least 186,000 people, according to the group Iraq Body Count. Altogether, nearly 4,500 Americans were killed in that campaign, and more than 32,000 Americans were wounded. Howard, Dick Cheney doesn't seem to want to go away, and when he comes back, it amazes me how he's invited on Sunday television to come back with that avuncular manner, as if he didn't take us into catastrophe. It's as if he's still fighting the Iraq war, as if we were winning. It was a brilliant idea.
Well, Chris, there's so many marks against him as an expert to be called in, I almost don't know where to start. Let's go back even before 9/11. The early Bush-Cheney administration was asleep at the switch in the months leading up to 9/11, ignoring warnings all over the place. It's one thing for George Bush to ignore them, but the great cold warrior Dick Cheney should have been alive to them in the months before 9/11. Then there's the Iraq War, as you mentioned, ill-conceived, sold to the American people on false pretenses. It cost us not only all those lives, tragically, but trillions of dollars, sapping the military strength that we might need now if we wanted to actually follow Cheney's advice. And then in 2008, when the former Soviet Union, when Vladimir Putin threw his weight around in the former Soviet Republic of Georgia, basically carved that country up in 2008 while Bush and Cheney were still in power. Did they do anything? Did they ratchet up military options? Americans? Did they put the squeeze on Vladimir Putin? Absolutely not. They looked the other way. So this is an amazing combination of incompetence and hypocrisy. That's what we're watching right now out of Dick Cheney.
You know, David, it used to be there was a protocol. You left Washington after you lost the presidency. You have 8 years here, then you get out of town. It's always been practiced by VP and P alike. This guy not only stays here, but he stays here after a catastrophe. The shamelessness of the guy, and then the way he gets treated on these Sunday shows drives me crazy. Like he's this brilliant Uncle Tanous that comes in and every once in a while tells you the truth of the world. Yeah. And he has nothing to stand on. Your thoughts? And by the way, it isn't much difference. Listen to him and listen to Sarah Palin. One may have the vintage, but I see no wisdom from either of these characters about war.
Dick Cheney, rising from the crypt to take a shot at Barack Obama and encourage bellicosity is about as surprising as a House Republican vote on repealing Obamacare. I mean, it seems every 6 months he gets the call. And, there's a larger point here, Chris, is whether it's Dick Cheney, Bill Kristol, or any of the other folks who marched us into war in Iraq in 2003, they end up paying no toll in our political media world. There's still, Henry Kissinger as well. They still get, called on the shows. They write their op-eds, and they keep going on. And I really think Dick Cheney won't be satisfied until he has shoved Barack Obama into a war, maybe as disastrous as the one Dick Cheney and George W. Bush gave us. But the notion that, the president is involved in a very, challenging diplomatic position, for him to come out there and say, we should give troops and support, military support to Ukraine when Ukraine hasn't even asked for it, strikes me as being completely reckless and irresponsible.
I just love that bonding he does. Well, Charles, or as we know, Charles, we're all in this together. We're all wise men. We know how these things work, don't we, young man? I mean, it's always that same avuncular fashion. It is oily. Anyway, this weekend, Ted Cruz blasted the president for his weakness, as he put it, and he joined Senator Lindsey Graham in linking the events in Ukraine to guess what else? We can't say bingo, so let's say Benghazi. It's all about Benghazi.
A critical reason for Putin's aggression has been President Obama's weakness. That Putin fears no retribution. Their policy has been to alienate and abandon our friends and to coddle and appease our enemies. And so Putin, you better believe Putin sees in Benghazi 4 Americans are murdered and nothing happens. There's no retribution. You better believe that Putin sees that in Syria, Obama draws a red line and ignores the red line.
There we go again. The Cold War's back. Howard, it doesn't stop. Cruz talks like a guy from the early 50s. I've said that a million times. I won't say it again. And yet this virulence, I don't know what to call it, because as somebody pointed out, maybe you just did, Howard or David, that, during the war with Georgia, the invasion of Georgia. Yeah, well, that's a good point.
They did nothing. They did nothing. They did absolutely nothing. Dick Cheney did nothing. He has no credibility talking about putting the screws to Putin when basically, first of all, George W. Bush looked into Putin's eyes and saw a companionable soul. Don't forget that. And then the Bush-Cheney administration looked the other way on Soviet Georgia. So they don't have any credibility on that. But what Ted Cruz is doing is what the Republicans have been trying to do to Barack Obama from the very beginning. They use the same words over and over again. They use feckless, that he's feckless, that he's weak, that he wears mom jeans, as if. Anything they can get their hands on to try to take him down as a strong leader on foreign policy. The fact is that you want to look at Libya, you don't look at Benghazi. Look at the fact that the United States essentially let a group in there that, that took Muammar Gaddafi out. I mean, that's what happened there, Benghazi notwithstanding. And Barack Obama, in many respects, in many ways, and his administration have used drones, have used surveillance, have used economic pressure in a very shrewd way, which these people would never acknowledge in a million years because it doesn't fit into their preconceived narrative of this sort of macho male thing that somehow Barack Obama and every Democrat since George McGovern has not fit into.
Chris, none of this tracks. None of this tracks, because here they are saying he was weak on Syria. He wasn't weak on Syria, but nevertheless, were the Republicans in the House and the Senate willing to vote on Syria, they ran away from that vote. They ran away from taking a stand on Libya. They didn't get involved there. And to say that because we haven't bombed anyone over Benghazi yet, when it took 10 years to track down Osama bin Laden, it just shows that Ted Cruz is not being serious. He is pushing buttons. He's not looking for solutions. And these buttons, unfortunately, do work. And I think it even bleeds into independent voters. They hear Benghazi over and over again, feckless, irresponsible, weak. And they start saying, well, what's all this I hear about Barack Obama being weak? So they just know it's the big lie theory. You say it again and again and again. Ask Ted Cruz, what should the president have done in retribution for Benghazi? You know, have we tracked the guys down? Has he let them go? He didn't do that with bin Laden. So what should have been done that hasn't been done yet? I bet you Ted Cruz doesn't have an answer.
I wish he'd go over and arm wrestle Fidel Castro and get it out of his system. Anyway, it's important to note that not every conservative is bashing the president as weak or suggesting our diplomacy should consist of taunting President Putin. Bob Gates, the former Secretary of Defense for both President Bush and President Obama, has called out some of his fellow Republicans for their over-the-top criticism of the president in the middle of a major international crisis. This weekend, he debunked the conservative talking point that the president's weakness caused this crisis. Let's watch Bob Gates here.
My own view is, after all, Putin invaded Georgia when George W. Bush was president. Nobody ever accused George W. Bush of being weak or unwilling to use military force. So I think Putin is very opportunistic in these arenas. I think that even if we had launched attacks in Syria, even if we weren't cutting our defense budget, I think Putin saw an opportunity here in Crimea, and he has seized it.
Well, meanwhile, last week, in fact, former Secretary of State Henry Kissinger, as he was mentioned earlier, quoted, here's he said, "For the West, the demonization of Vladimir Putin is not a policy. It is an alibi for the absence of one." And James Baker, the former Secretary of State under George Herbert Walker Bush, stressed the importance of prudent diplomacy and not letting rhetoric get overheated. Let's watch the Secretary Baker.
Do we have to give President Putin a way out?
Well, I think in a political problem like this, that's what diplomacy is all about, of course. Finding a way where both sides can walk away from the table and not feel totally shamed and humiliated.
Well, now let's listen to the crazy car. Here's Bill Kristol, John Boehner, and Lindsey Graham in order, and then Sarah Palin. Let's watch all the whack jobs going at it in this case.
We could make life pretty miserable for Putin in an awful lot of ways. You want him to be humiliated. He needs to be weakened at home.
You've heard me call President Putin a thug. It's because he is. And he's counting on the United States to sit back and watch him do and take whatever he wants.
He very much cares about democracy on his borders. I would like to create a democratic noose around Putin's Russia.
How do you convey to Putin the threat that sounds like, Vladimir, don't mess around or you're going to feel my flexibility? Because I got a phone and I got a pen and I can dial really fast and poke you with my pen. He would gut our arsenal while he allows others, enemies, to enrich theirs. Oh, man, that's just like a liberal on gun control. Mr. President, the only thing that stops a bad guy with a nuke is a good guy with a nuke. That's it, NRA.
Guys, how about a final word on that kind of thinking? I grew up hiding under a desk as a school kid because of the threat of a nuclear war between us and the United States and the Soviet Union. And for somebody to laugh about nuclear confrontation, and then to applaud it, what planet do these people live on? These full mooners at CPAC, Howard.
Chris, I think everybody knows that Vladimir Putin is a thug. That's not the question. The question is, how do you deal with him? How do you diplomatically wrap him up so that we can move forward as a planet? That's the first thing. The second thing here, I'll say again, what the Republicans love this tripe are doing is going after the very manhood of the Democratic president. It's been part of their strategy for 2 generations now. Barack Obama didn't fit into it initially, especially after Osama bin Laden was gotten rid of. And they're going to do everything they can, call him every name they can think of to try to humiliate him in that way.
And that's the goal here.
Okay.
The goal here is not to solve the problem in Ukraine.
Right.
The goal here is to get political advantage and gain some territory on Barack Obama, whether it's for Lindsey Graham to win his primary challenge in South Carolina or to set up for 2016. That's what it's about. None of this is about trying to help. I mean, look at James Baker. He'll tell you diplomacy is hard, and it's not helped by name-calling.
Well, someone should tell Governor Palin that nuclear war is not a metaphor for manhood. It's insanity. Anyway, thank you, Howard Fineman, and thank you, David Korn. Coming up, if you